Okay, so today we're going to start a unit on the Reformation and just really dig into how it changed European society and culture in the early 1600s and how you can even see the effects of it today. So since we're just starting the unit, we're just going to be looking at the start of the Reformation and really just diving into the events that kind of built up on top of each other to really get to that breaking point of the Reformation. So throughout this lesson, I'm going to ask different questions, have you do different activities. So I want you to get out a piece of paper and pencil and to be able to write down these questions and activity. And at the end of the lesson, I'm going to have you take a picture of it and turn it on canvas. So the first question I want you to answer by writing down is, what are some examples where religion impacted society at some point in history? So go ahead and pause the video and just come up with a quick answer to the question and jot it down in your paper. So some of the ones that I thought when I heard this question was, first to the Crusades, of the Christians trying to invade Israel and the Holy Lands and going to war against the Muslims. Also the different pilgrims going over to America to escape religious persecution. You think of the Holocaust. You can think of the conflict in the Middle East throughout the last couple of decades, just mostly that revolves religion. There are so many answers that you could have came up with, as we could spend all day. We spent all year actually talking about these different religious conflicts and what different religious events that impacted society, but we'd be here all year. So, but today we're going to be talking about the Reformation, which had a great impact on Europe. It completely redid the political system, rechanged culture and society as everybody knew it. So let's take a look at it. So a little background on the Reformation. We won't go super deep into this since we're just looking at the intro of it. But the word Reformation literally means the making of changes to institutional practice. So what the Reformation is, a bunch of guys came along together, looked at the Catholic Church, and realized that it didn't line up with the Bible, it didn't line up with culture and how society was progressing. So they wanted to bring changes about to it. So they came together and instituted these different points of change to refute the Catholic Church and refute their place in society. That's just a little summary. There's a lot more to it than that, but as the unit progresses, we'll dig into it more. So, the main questions and learning objectives that we have going for us today are, you'll be able to recognize the main causes and events that led to the Reformation. You'll be able to recognize key identities, individuals, and groups in the Protestant Reformations, and you'll be able to evaluate how the Reformation shaped Europe in the early 1500s. Also, the main central question we're going to answer today is, what were the main things and events that led to the Reformation? One of the main causes of the Reformation was the continual corruption of the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church was the most powerful institution throughout Europe, and they held the most influence over individuals and just over culture as a whole throughout Europe, as everybody would submit themselves to the authority of the church. Almost everybody throughout Europe would consider themselves Catholic, and therefore they would just follow what the church says and just submit themselves to the authority of the church. Also, every single person would have priests over them, and so they would look at this priest as a source of authority and do what the priest says. The priest would be there for every big life event, such as births, baptisms, weddings, deaths. Any big life event, the priest was there trying to lead people and giving them orders to follow. Also, the church was the main provider of social services. They would provide daycares, and they would provide just access to entertainment. They would provide meetings for the community. But the big thing they would provide was education. So education wasn't a big thing at the time, as it was very hard to get and very hard to find. So the church would control all sources of education as they provided to the community, so they can control what was being taught in these schools. Also, the church owned 1/3 of the land in Europe. The more land you had, the more power you have. So owning this much land gave the church that much more power. And then the Pope claimed power over every king in Europe. So in Europe, the Pope was the highest source of authority. It was over any government, over any individual. So everybody would have to look up to the Pope, see what he says, and obey what the Pope says, as he's the number one in Europe. People didn't like how much political power that the Catholic Church had, and therefore they wanted to bring changes to it to weaken the church and strengthen the state and the government. And so therefore, because they wanted to be able to look to a central government, they wanted to walk away from the church and separate church and state from between each other. Also, the rise of nationalism contributed to the decline of the power of the Catholic Church. People started to identify more with their country. They had a new sense of pride and founding, in their nationality, in their people group, in their government, and identified more with their nationality in the state and the Catholic Church. They are now identifying themselves as German or Italian or French over identifying as Catholic. And people saw this and decided that they wanted to call for changes in the Catholic Church to decrease their political power and increase the political power of the state. Also, the ideas of the Renaissance going around attributed to people wanting change to the church. The ideas centered around the Renaissance were humanism and secularism. Humanism was the idea of just promoting the individual. They wanted to promote individual thought, individual persons, over the collective group thought of the church. Also, secularism promoted more science and critical thinking skills, which argued that those things went against the church's teaching, and therefore these two ideas caused people to call for changes or even walk away from the church. So now I want you to go back to your piece of paper and answer this question. Well, what is the best thing you've ever bought? Just go ahead and pause the video and write down your answer. I'm sure all of you have bought something great in your life, whether it be a phone or a car or something super cool or a toy or just something great. But what if I could tell you you could buy salvation? You can buy eternal life in heaven with God. It would be awesome, right? But that was what the church was teaching in the early 16th century. They were teaching that you could buy your salvation. And that was called indulgences. So how this would work were people would go into the church and exchange their money for a slip of paper that said that they were saved, that they had purchased this indulgence, and therefore their sins were forgiven, and therefore they had claimed eternal life in heaven. And these indulgences would often be about half a year's wage. So all these people's monies were going into the slip in order to be saved. And this teaching was not in line with the Bible. This teaching was not in line with church history. So it made a lot of people question it. It made a lot of those different monks, different common people of the church call for reformation and a call to go back to biblical teachings instead of just a call to make money off the commoners. The second main cause of the Reformation was the invention of the printing press. So the printing press is just pretty much a copier and a printer. So you can have a text, a book, or a different government document, put it through the printing press, and it will just pump out copies on copies of this document. Before the printing press, someone would have to go in and take this book or a document and handwrite everything sentence by sentence in order to copy it. And that just took a lot of time, took a lot of labor, just not an ideal setup to copy things. So the invention of the printing press allowed for the mass distribution of books, different documents, and different ideas to be distributed. So the printing press would mass produce a different book, and said book would be then distributed widely to the common folks of Europe. Because before the printing press, the common folks could not get their hands on books, as it was seen as a thing of wealth, and therefore only the rich and wealthy would have books, since it was just so hard to get, since it was so hard to copy. The printing press multiplied these documents, multiplied these books, and got them in the hands of the common people. And therefore, since the commoners were now reading these books, different documents, the ideas going on for the Reformation, the ideas of the Renaissance, was now being spread throughout all Europe instead of just throughout the elite class. And so it gave the commoners things to think about and things to consider about reforming the Catholic Church. Also, the decline of the Latin language played a part in the printing press, as the Bible is only written in Latin. And since the Bible is only written in Latin, only the Pope and the high priests throughout the church could read the Bible. But with the printing press decline of Latin, was now the Bible is able to translate it into native languages, into native tongues. And therefore, since the printing press would mass distribute the Bible in common languages, the layman, the commoners, could now have access to the Bible, could now read their Bibles for themselves. They no longer had to blindly follow the Pope or the church and just assume what the church said was right, but they could come to their own conclusions of the Bibles. So they could now read the Bible for themselves, compare it with the teaching of the church, and see that those two things did not line up. And therefore, people called for Reformation as they saw that the Bible and the church did not agree in teachings, did not agree in doctrine, and therefore change was on the rise. So now that we briefly discussed the two main causes of the Reformation, I want you to take a second and go back to your piece of paper and just answer this question. What were the things that led to the Reformation, and how did that change European culture? So just take a second, and pick one thing that we talked about today and just answer what was it, how did it change the culture, how did it lead to the Reformation? So go ahead and pause the video and do that now. So now that you answered the question, we're just going to look at a couple main takeaways that I just really want you to walk away with. So the two main causes of the Reformation, the first being the continual corruption of the Catholic Church, that being them selling indulgences, so selling salvation for money, which doesn't line up with biblical doctrine, which doesn't line up with church history. People saw these things, saw that the Catholic Church was becoming hungry for money, and that was not Christianity. So therefore, they want to change. They want a Reformation to change this institution to revert back to its traditions. And then the second thing about the Catholic Church is how powerful they were politically throughout Europe. And therefore, people saw them hold this power. They saw them growing in influence over the European culture and wanted that to stop. They wanted to identify with their nation. They wanted a strong central government that could command the culture, command society, instead of having to bow down to the authority of the church and the Pope. So therefore, they want to change the code. And the second big thing being the invention of the printing press. New ideas could now be widely distributed, as documents can now be easily copied and distributed to the commoners. And therefore, every single person throughout Europe had access to these diverse ideas. They can now read their things from themselves and come to their own conclusions of society, and therefore shape society from themselves instead of just leaving it up to the elite, to the church, to the government. They could take their matters into their own hands. And that also led to different texts such as the Bibles being accessible to the commoners. So they could look at these things, read the Bible for themselves, compare it to the Catholic Church, and see that those two things didn't line up, such as the things for indulgences is not found in the Bible, and therefore they wanted to reform. They wanted to change the Catholic Church. They wanted to tear down the Catholic Church and take back society, take back the culture in their own hands, take back Christianity and make it biblical Christianity instead of what the Catholic Church was teaching, and not just cause massive Reformation throughout Europe, cause massive culture change, society change, as society started to move away from the Catholic Church and more focused on the government, on statehood, as people start having pride for nationalism and would look for a strong central government. So these are just the two quick summaries of the main points, what caused the Reformation. So we'll look more in depth to what actually the Reformation brought about changes, how it was done, how the Reformation actually happened, but those will be continued on the next lessons. But for now, I want you to take that piece of paper that you answer those questions with, and take a picture of it, and then we're going to go ahead and submit it in Canvas. Thank you guys for listening to lessons. We'll catch